Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Digging Deeper Moment number 119. The mission of our Digging Deeper Moments is to take God's Word to God's world, and we are so glad that you've joined us. Tonight, we complete our journey through the third section of the New Testament, which I liken to the walls and windows of a house. We pick up where we left off last week. We left off last week with 2 Peter. 2 Peter is followed by 1 John. 1 John was written by the Apostle John, one of the original 12 followers of Jesus. He wrote sometime between 65 and 90 AD. We're not sure exactly when. The icon I like to use for 1 John is an SAT exam, because John provides a series of tests for determining the true faith of Jesus Christ in this small letter. 1 John can be divided into 9 sections, 7 tests, and an introduction and a closing. 1 John chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, we find an introduction, which he speaks about the incarnation of Christ. In 1 John chapter 1, verse 5 through chapter 2, verse 17, he gives us the test of obedience. In chapter 2, verse 18 through 27, we find the test of truth. 1 John chapter 2, verse 28 through chapter 3, verse 9 is the test of lifestyle. In chapter 3, verse 10 through chapter 3, verse 24, we have the test of love. In chapter 4, verses 1 through 6, we have the test of confession. In chapter 4, verses 7 through 21, we have the test of love. And through chapter 5, verse 1 to verse 13, I know there's a lot of text here, the test of belief. And finally, in chapter 5, verses 14 through 21, we have closing remarks. Now, 2 John follows 1 John. It's a very short letter written by the Apostle John to a woman in one of the churches that John oversaw. I'm having a hard time talking today. He warns her not to give hospitality to the wrong people. The icon I like to use for 2 John is a hotel, because 2 John warns about giving hospitality to the wrong kind of people. And it can be divided into 4 parts, even though it's a very short letter. In verses 1 through 3, we have the greeting. In verses 4 through 6, we have an exhortation to live the commandments of Jesus. And in verses 7 through 11, we have a warning to beware of deceivers. And in verses 12 and 13, we have a conclusion. Now, 2 John is followed by 3 John, also written by the Apostle John, and he wrote to a man named Gaius. The icon I like to use of 3 John is a citation award, because in this letter, John praises Gaius and a man named Demetrius. It can be divided into 6 parts. In verses 1 through 4, we have a greeting. In verses 5 through 8, we have John's commendation of Gaius. In verses 9 and 10, we have John's condemnation of Diotrephes. In verse 11, we have John's command to do good. In verse 12, we have John's commendation of Demetrius. And in verse 13-14, we have a conclusion. Now, 3 John is followed by the book of Jude. It was written by the half-brother of Jesus, and he identifies himself as the brother of James, who also was a half-brother of Jesus. So that makes him a half-brother of Jesus. Like 2 Peter, Jude is written to warn of false teachers. The icon I like to use for Jude is that of the Beatles song, "Hey Jude, don't be afraid. Just take a sad song and make it better." But remember, you know what I mean by that song. Hey Jude. Jude is warning us or telling us not to be afraid of false teachers. And that's why I like that icon. The book that can be divided into 6 parts. We have in verses 1 through 2, we have a greeting. In Jude 3 and 4, we have an exhortation to contend for the true faith. In verses 5 through 9, we have a biblical reminder of how God deals with false teachers. In verses 10 through 19, we have a description of what false teachers look like. And in verse 20 through 22, we have an exhortation to steadfastness. And verses 23 through 24, we have a closing doxology. And this brings us to the last section of the New Testament, the one prophetical book, which we've likened to the roof of a house. Now, if you remember, the foundation of the New Testament is the 4 Gospels. The floor is the historical book of Acts. And the walls and the windows are the letters of the New Testament, which we just have been covering from Romans to Jude. And now the last section is the roof, and it only has 1 book. It's the prophetical book of the book of Revelation. Now, in Digging Deeper Moments 27 through 46, I showed how the book of Revelation is laid out like a temple worship service. So the icon I like to use for Revelation is a temple worship service. For more details, I would refer you to them. Tonight, I want to give you a very simple outline. It's based upon what we learned in Digging Deeper Moments 27 through 46. But this outline is much simpler than I give in those Digging Deeper Moments. But this is a good place to start to familiarize yourself with really the overall structure of the book of Revelation. Also remember, Revelation is a letter, so it's kind of like the other letters that were written, but just using a different genre. In Revelation chapter 1, verses 1 through 9, we have a greeting. In Revelation 1:10 through 7:17, we have the beginning of the heavenly worship service. Everything that takes place in this part of Revelation is consistent with what happened in a worship service in the Temple of Jerusalem. In chapter 8, verse 1 through chapter 13, verse 18, we have the middle of the heavenly worship service. The things that happened there are consistent with what happened in a worship service in the middle. In Revelation 14, verse 1 through chapter 22, verse 5, we have the end of the heavenly worship service, and the things that happened there are consistent with what happened in a worship service in the Temple of Jerusalem at the end. And then in chapter 22, verses 6 through 21, we have closing remarks. Now, Revelation follows the liturgy of the Temple of Jerusalem from beginning, middle to end exactly. It is so similar that I have marveled over the years that scholars have not written more about this in their writings. So, now we've given you an outline, a summary, and an icon for all 66 books of the Bible. Next week, we'll give you a timeline for the writings of the New Testament books before moving on to our next series, which will be reading and understanding the Old Testament prophets. You're not going to want to miss that series if you want to understand better the prophetical books of the Old Testament, because we're going to learn some critical secrets that will unlock the mysteries of some of these books. And that's where we'll pick it up next week. If this lesson has helped you, please share it with a friend, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or check out our Sunday morning live podcast on either Apple or Spotify. And if you would like to partner with us as we take God's Word to God's world, you can do so by going to our website and clicking the How to Give tab. I hope to see you next week.